Hi everyone, I'm Nick Lopez. Welcome to Beyond the Frontlines, Veterans in the Humanities. You are about to hear a bonus episode featuring our live virtual Proud to Be reading and roundtable Missouri Humanities hosted recently in celebration of the release of Volume 14. During this event, you will hear prose and poetry by American veterans and military-connected family members. New this year, we also featured a message from our photography winner. For almost 15 years, Missouri Humanities has been publishing Proud to Be, writing by American warriors. We believe that every veteran has a story to tell, and it's important we listen and learn from these varying stories of service to country, courage, and honor. Thank you for your support to our veterans. Enjoy. Hello and good evening. I'm Nick Lopez, Veteran Programs Coordinator for Missouri Humanities. Missouri Humanities is a statewide nonprofit that explores history, civics, and culture through community partnerships and public programming. Thank you for joining us for our annual reading celebrating the release of Proud to Be, writing by American warriors. This past Veterans Day, November 11th, we released Volume 14. Since 2011, Missouri Humanities has partnered with organizations across the state to provide veterans, service members, and military-connected families with opportunities for self-expression through writing. Our veterans program include writing workshops, this annual publication, events like tonight's reading, and the podcast Beyond the Frontlines. These programs encourage veterans to tell their stories each year. Military veterans' invaluable perspectives on bravery, camaraderie, and sacrifice for their country remain unheard and important to our society. We hope to foster difficult conversations on military service that bridge the gap of understanding between veterans and civilians, strengthening our connections throughout our communities. Tonight, we will hear from 7 contributors to this volume, followed by a roundtable discussion with 4 of the participating readers. Our roundtable moderator is Mark Sundlov, who wrote the foreword for Volume 14. Mark is the managing director of Soldiers Memorial Military Museum for the Missouri Historical Society. Mark has worked nearly 20 years in museum and historic site administration. Prior to his current career, Mark received a commission from the U.S. Air Force Academy and served as a captain in the U.S. Air Force as a launch control officer in the Minuteman nuclear missile system. A few items before we begin. Tonight's readings may include strong language and descriptions of mature situations. Viewer discretion is advised. We encourage you to participate in this conversation. Use the chat box to cheer on our readers and submit your questions using the Q&A feature. Mark will address as many questions as possible during the roundtable. Finally, I'd like to thank our supporters who make our veterans programs possible, veterans from Veterans United Foundation, the contributors, to the judges, and all of you tuning in tonight. A special thank you to our editor, Luke Rolfs of Green Tower Press of Northwest Missouri State University, who will introduce tonight's readers and panelists. Let's give Luke a virtual round of applause.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, everybody, for being here. It's my pleasure to introduce the readers tonight, and we're going to start with a fiction reader. The first reader of the night is Travis Klempan. He was the winner of this year's fiction contest for his story, How a Good Day Ends. Here is his bio. So Travis Klempan joined the Navy out of high school, serving as an FMF corpsman with the Marine Corps. He earned a commission as a surface warfare officer and deployed 3 times, including to Iraq. He is the author of the novels Have Snakes, Need Birds, and Hills Hide Mountains. Let's take it away, Travis. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Luke. I'll be reading from the beginning of How a Good Day Ends. Julio opened the refrigerator, retrieved the orange juice, and considered scrambling himself an egg or two. He decided against it, opting instead for a granola bar, and let the door slam shut. The impact set the Formica breakfast table behind him to vibrating. He glanced over as he poured the juice into a glass, content in the knowledge that the world shaking off its axis would not disrupt Mi Buela's task. She bent over the fine stationery that she had asked Julio to bring home a few days before, along with stamps from the post office. With such fine tools, she'd said, my message must be crafted with care. Satisfied with her signature, Mi Buela blew on the page to dry the ink. She folded the paper carefully into thirds, slid it into the envelope, lifted it to her mouth. Julio leaned forward and shouted curses in Spanish, English, and in French, filling the envelope with her hard visions of the candidate's future, imploring him to pull his head from his ass. And woe to anyone who did not heed the warnings of an old woman in San Sebastian, Nuevo Mexico, gracias a Dios. Julio smiled and sipped from his glass. Mi Buela licked the envelope and sealed it quickly, hoping to trap as much of the energy as possible. She affixed an American flag stamp to the upper right-hand corner and slid it across the table toward her grandson, then made the sign of the cross over her chest. Julio finished the juice and rinsed the glass in the sink. Is this one for McCain? He asked. Or Obama? Senator McCain, Mi Buela replied. Tomas mailed the one for Senator Obama on his way to soccer practice. That kid rises early. Julio scooped up the letter and slid it into the back pocket of his jeans. Anything else you need from me today? I'm headed to the store, but should be back before lunch. I picked up a shift tonight. He grabbed the keys to his truck and pulled his ball cap from its appointed hook by the door. Yes. She stood and gave him a hug, a kiss on both cheeks, and ran her hand over his head. Consider getting a haircut. I cannot believe it's grown this long and the girls still look at you. Julio grinned and kissed the top of her head. There's only one girl for me, he said, and she's waiting for me at the store. Tomas may have put the letter in the mailbox, but it would never get picked up, Julio saw, not without raising the little flag on the side. Their mailman was meticulous, thorough, a Vietnam vet who liked to draw with Julio whenever he was running late, and only when he was running late, always asking after the younger man's health, mental and physical. Rudy claimed that Agent Orange had taken all of his hair and most of his teeth, and was convinced that Julio and all the other Iraq and Afghanistan war vets would start getting sick soon. And if he didn't register with the VA up in Albuquerque, then Julio would suffer just the same as Aye. He pulled his hand back from the mailbox and stuck his finger in his mouth. Good morning. He turned. It wasn't Rudy, but Amanda, the woman who'd lived next to Mi Buela and the Cristobal family for years, going so far back as to be the teenager who babysat a young Julio and even younger Tomas. Grown, no kids of her own, she liked to check in on Mi Buela, Tomas, and, since he'd landed back at home after getting out, Julio. Hey, Amanda, nice day out, yeah? You okay? She nodded toward his hand, which he now shook in hopes of distributing the pain. He saw the offender crawl out of the mailbox and rest upon the back of the door. That little a-hole just stabbed me. Stabbed, she replied. Don't you mean stung? Bees sting, he said. Wasps stab you, little effer. He considered mashing the life out of its body, but he had no weapon nor any stomach for the act. Off it flew, and he glanced inside, ensuring there was no nest or another bunch of little effers. Huh, I never thought of there being a difference, Amanda said. You sure you're okay? He smiled his relief at her as he slid the envelope in to accompany its partner, then shut the door and lifted the flag that signaled a need. This ain't nothing. The wound still smarted, though. Julio thought about telling her about the time his platoon had to deliver 10,000 honeybees to a farmer in Diyala province so the man would stop snitching on them to Al-Qaeda, but he decided against it. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Travis. It's always really fun for me to hear these pieces get read aloud. Next up, we're going to hear from a poet, and the next reader is Charity Winters. Charity Winters is a graduate of the New Mexico Military Institute and the United States Air Force Academy. After 6 years on active duty as a security forces officer, she went on to earn a Master of Arts in English Literature and Creative Writing from Austin Peay. She lives and writes in Key West. Here is Charity.
Hello, everybody. Yes, the winter finally did come to us in Key West. Apparently, our low on Monday is going to be 59, if that makes any of you feel better about how cold it is where you're at. So, yes, this evening I'd like to share with you a poem entitled Occupation, the Implications of a Noun. Occupation, the Implications of a Noun. 1. A situation to seek, like a profession, job, or vocation. 2. The collective sensory-motor, cognitive, and physiological processes of engaging individuals or groups for any pursuit. 3. The act of taking a space, mind, community, or nation. 4. A military force remaining long after invading, and how the keeping are kept, regardless of the side taken. 5. Expired liberation. That was Occupation, the Implications of a Noun, that I wrote many years ago, actually, but that I find interesting that the definitions or the concepts about the word occupation still ring true today and are things to be considered. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Charity. Thank you. All right. Next up, we have Erick Bergvik. Erick's piece, The Wait, was an honorable mention in the fiction contest. Erick Bergvik is a veteran of the U.S. Coast Guard, where his responsibilities included search and rescue and law enforcement missions. He currently lives in Connecticut with his family, where he teaches high school English. Erick Bergvik.
Yeah, thank you everybody for having me here. This is really exciting for me, so I appreciate it. Yeah, this is from a piece called The Wait. You're standing in the supermarket, searching for your wife's favorite salsa. Your dress shirt is half untucked and your work shoes are worn, and you hope that your oversized winter coat grants you enough anonymity to carry on with your mundane task without an interruption so you can get home for dinner. It's taco night. But then, for reasons you will never understand, something ignites your attention, and against your will, you turn your head to see a woman. Your glance turns into a stare, and now you stand transfixed in aisle 5 because you cannot understand how that woman with that face could possibly be standing under this crackling fluorescent lights just the same as you. It isn't actually her. You know this. You test your reality and judge your surroundings and determine that, yes, it really is just Tuesday, you're not in the Coast Guard anymore, and there is not a dead woman browsing for condiments 15 feet away from you. Nevertheless, you see her squat chin and her full lips resting in a natural frown, and that's enough to shoot you backward through time into a moment you have avoided remembering. This is where she lives. You're 27 and it's a day in the Coast Guard. A husband had been driving his Carolina skiff too fast. He lost control, and a sudden shift in direction violently ejected his wife and himself into the water. You're kneeling on your boat's aluminum deck, its non-skid cutting into your knees like thorns. The feverish hand of the August sun warms your neck, and you reach over the gunwale to cup your hands under the wife's armpits and pull her limp and strangely dense body out of the water. Her elbows and heels thump against the deck. She is unconscious, not breathing. Her skin is turned gray and water seeps out of her bathing suit, and you position her for CPR. She looks bored, disinterested, her eyes barely open and peering over your shoulder. Her tangled hair falls away from her forehead. You are young, but you are in charge of this mission. So while you get ready to try to save her life, you tell your crewmen to bring your husband into the cabin so he doesn't have to see what is about to happen. He's conscious, breathing, already on the boat. but staring down at you with an expression that screams, "Please, this can't be real. Don't let this be real." You tell the helmsman to radio the station and get an ambulance to meet you back at the pier upriver. He does so and then punches the throttles forward. The engines start their low-pitched whine. The bow lifts up before it slams down, up and then down. The wind rushing and energy accumulating. You almost fall backward toward the stern, but she remains still. You interlock your hands and place them on her sternum. You extend your arms, lean your weight over her, and start compressions. Her ribs immediately crack. You wince, but don't stop. In training, they say that broken ribs are a sign that you're doing it right, but you've never done this before, and it feels unnatural and mechanical to hear each compression click. Out loud, you count to 30. You stare at her face, looking for signs of consciousness. The compressions make her head nod rhythmically, as if she is half asleep but passively agreeing with your urging for her to live. Her lips are frowning but slightly parted, and each repetition forces out a bit of white foam from her mouth. After 30 reps, you wipe the foam away, tilt her chin up and forehead backward. You put your lips on hers and push in her air. Her cheeks puff out, cartoonishly, as though she's a child with her face pressed against a window. You know this isn't good. Her lungs are full of water. The air has nowhere to go. You start compressions again. Gravity tilts as the boat banks and weaves its way back to the pier. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Come on, you say, looking for her eyes to open or slam shut or her face to turn to one side to cough and vomit water. But none of that happens. Each rep, each subtle nod, each clicking compression of her chest slowly and incrementally opens her eyes. Now they're wide open, and she looks shocked and surprised as she stares at the sky. More breaths, more repetitions, more cracking, more watching her face, but you already know that her life is gone and isn't coming back. The boat slows, and there's no longer the rush of wind to keep the heat at bay. You keep counting, you keep pressing. You want this to be over, and you don't want to stop because then the truth of it all will be real. You barely notice your crew as they lasso the lines to the pier. A paramedic taps you on the shoulder, and in that one gesture, you can sense his authority, so you make room and watch as they lift her, as though she's weightless, onto a stretcher. You stand up and stretch your cramped hamstrings. The deck's thorny non-skid is cut through your uniform and into your knees, so you rub them with shaking hands and try not to meet the husband's stare as he follows her off the boat. After the ambulance leaves, a crewman pats you on the back and says something you don't hear because you still have the sound of clicking in your ears. That happened 14 years ago and hundreds of miles away. You know she is dead. But these facts don't prevent you from seeing her there in the supermarket. And even as you try to flee your memory, you feel a terrible weight drape across your shoulders and non-skid cut into your knees. That's the piece. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric, very much. So we're going to switch gears again. We'll go back to poetry. This time we're going to hear from Jan LaPerle. And Jan LaPerle served 22 years in the Army. She now teaches high school English in Elizabethtown, Kentucky. Her writing can be found on her website, which is janlaperle.me. So check her out. Jan LaPerle.
Hi, Luke. Thank you. And thank you, Nick, for putting this together. I am just on the tail end of the flu, so I sound awful and feel awful. But I'm going to read one poem. And I just want to thank you all again. This is really wonderful. I'm going to read In the Months Before Making Friends. So every time I went to a new unit, as most of you know, it was just so foreign at first, right? So there was just this space where you didn't know anyone, and everything felt really familiar, and how quickly it became familiar. So that's what this poem is about. And we also did this fundraiser every year where we would pack our rucksacks with canned food and march for, I don't know, for a long time, and then donate it. So and the months before making friends. Thanksgiving Army fundraiser. Here I am again, gathering up my dresses. I mean, the night. I woke with so much of it in me. I mean, my cap, my keys, my mask, always my mask. My rucksack filled with canned goods. I am giving, thanks. I am heavy, not just with beans, not just with yams. When I try to talk, it's all wind and leaves. Why are there so many people that are this hungry? And why today do I have to feel this small? The dresses I carry are buckled tight around my heart. I gather them and start marching. I march and I march. It won't be like this forever, I whisper inside my mask. What filters through says it is. But how can I hear anything? Everyone talks at once, and everything in between everything is all just wind and leaves. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jan. Sorry to hear you're not feeling well. Next up, we are going to move over to essay, and we're going to hear from the person who won the essay contest. It's James Hessler. James Hessler was a public school teacher for a few months before he was drafted in 1966. The Army trained him to be an intelligence analyst at Fort Holabird, Maryland, and he served there as an instructor. In Vietnam, he served with the 4th PSYOPs Group. Reconciliation of his opposition to the war with his service in Vietnam has consumed decades of his life. Writing essays and a memoir for publication is a relatively recent occupation and powerful therapy. James Hessler.
Thank you, Luke. I'm honored to be here. I've been reading part of my essay, River Crossing, which grew out of a letter that I wrote to a friend. Colonel Turner, commanding officer of my unit, the 4th PSYOPs Group, seldom held briefings. When a meeting was called, it sparked crazy speculation. I rated them all E5, unverifiable. At ease, have a seat, Colonel Turner said. This will be brief. You are making important contributions to the Hearts and Minds campaigns. You don't see the impact of our paper saturation bombing, but millions of leaflets and thousands of hours of broadcast make a difference. Remember, where the mind goes, the feet will follow. We've been offered an opportunity to join an operation with our CB brothers. Anyone who wants to join them for a day of water skiing on the river is welcome. Just don't let the bursts of fire bother you unless they point the muzzle in your direction. As the colonel left, I headed for the sign-up sheet. My group leader, Sergeant Smith, said, "Where the fuck are you going? You don't need a war story. That bullshit's not you." But I did need the bullshit war story. I needed to know my opposition to the war wasn't cowardice. I wanted to know I could face danger, even if it was just for a day. The next day, Wainwright, a printing press operator, and I were the only takers. We jumped into a 3/4-ton truck with open benches in the bed. Travelers on small vehicles jammed the street behind us. Wainwright held his hands up as if holding a rifle and feigned shooting the cyclo and motorcycle riders directly behind the truck. I saw the frowns and fear in the faces of the Vietnamese behind the truck as they dropped back. "Okay, Wainwright," I said. "I think that's enough terrorizing of the local citizens. Hearts and minds, soldiers, hearts and minds." Wainwright dropped his arms and sat down on the truck bench. "Yeah, you think? That cute young thing," he pointed to a young girl on a motorbike, "was going to pull a grenade out of her crotch and drop it in the truck." "You saw that?" I asked, looking Wainwright in the face. "In your dreams." The city gave way to fields of rice and then tropical forest. The bushes became shrouded by a thickening layer of taller and taller trees. An opening appeared in the jungle, and the sound of flowing water replaced engine noise. The river was wide enough for multiple boats to travel in both directions. The jungle, the river, the guy sitting next to me, none of that was comforting. While waiting at a picnic table for our turn, I saw a group of Vietnamese people and small boats gathered on the shore upstream. One woman maneuvered a slightly longer version of the low, narrow boat toward the spot where the dirt road met the river on the opposite shore. The pilot was petite. She wore a black, loose-fitting tunic. She sat in the rear of the boat and used a long wooden oar to power and steer. Never lifting the oar out of the water, she propelled and steered the boat with grace and precision. The boat barely moved as the cargo and people were loaded. The pilot, her passengers, the people on the shore, no one looked our way. The Navy riverboat made a loop on the open section of river. The petite river taxi pilot lifted her steering oar to the surface and rotated it from side to side like an outrigger. Her low craft stayed almost upright as the wave passed under. Were they grateful for protection from the Viet Cong, fearful of the foreign forces, or both? Beyond skill on the water, I was impressed with her focus on maintaining her world in the face of our wanton destruction of her homeland. When it was my turn to ski, I asked the riverboat captain to stay away from the area where the ferry pilot was operating. She's a VC's fly, watching us every day. You're looking at me like it's bullshit. With your intel, you should know. I took my 3 loops up and down the river behind the powerful Navy riverboat. I was pleased with myself. I felt shame and my pity and joy. I was glad I didn't have to face the riverboat pilot. I didn't want to look into her eyes. We loaded up on the 3/4-ton truck. On the way back to Saigon, I told Wainwright about what I saw and how the Navy boat captain responded. I felt strongly that the lady boat pilot was innocent. I wanted her to be innocent. I knew I could be wrong. Wainwright said, if I was on the M60 following the ski boat, I'd waste her ass. Maybe she's just a cabbie on the river, I said. Tough shit. Get in my field of fire, you die. Thank you.
So much, James. Okay. Next up, we have Sarah Colby, who was an honorable mention in the poetry contest this year. Sarah Colby is a military spouse and mother to a Navy son. Her experiences over more than 30 years as an Army wife motivate her desire to be a voice for the mostly untold stories of families and loved ones on the periphery of active military service. Sarah holds an MA in art history from Brigham BYU and an MFA in creative writing from UNR Tahoe. She lives with her husband, a retired Army chaplain, in San Antonio, Texas, where she mentors veteran/military writing groups and teaches writing and community-based programs. Here's Sarah.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, and I so appreciate this publication. So thank you for the work and the effort to put it together. I'll be reading one poem this evening. That's a poem that grew out of what happened after my husband returned from Iraq, and I got a series of really inappropriate or untoward questions from people who didn't really know me well, but wanted to get some sort of juicy tidbit to tell. So this is where that came from. Inapposite inquiry. Did your husband kill anyone in Iraq? In the desert, wind marries sand. They go everywhere together. Erase blue sky and fill it in with brown. Turn the sun orange, smother sound, sometimes with shrieks of glee, others with a constant whisper that muffles voices cloaked in keffiyeh, pulled over mouths like bandanas in a bad Western. In a storm like that, you tell me, you can't hear, can hardly see the soldier standing next to you, don't know what's heading your way. You call Iraq the sandbox, but it is nothing like the clean, fine grains heaped in my girlhood backyard. I would play under the stippled green of a tall cottonwood, absorbed for hours in landscapes of my own making, loath to leave shovel and pail. No compunction to answer when my mother calls. There is no place to hide. Instead, I turn away, sifting sand through my fingers as if I never heard her at all. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Okay, and the last contributor we're going to hear from, this is kind of fun for me because I don't think we've done a photo winner before, but we're going to hear from Donna Fullerton. I think Nick's going to pull the photo up, perhaps. So Donna Fullerton is a Marine veteran, multidisciplinary artist, and photographer whose work explores the American West, documents wildlife, and investigates the enduring relationship between land, history, and resilience. Drawing on decades of experience in photography, music, and visual arts, she has earned national recognition, including awards from the National Veterans Creative Arts Festival and publications with National Geographic, the National Park Service, and the National Park Foundation. She lives and works in Western Colorado, returning repeatedly to the landscapes she documents. So thanks, Donna, for being with us. I think you're muted, Donna. Are you still with us, Donna?
Sorry. I'm sorry.
Oh, there
Can you
you
hear
are.
me now?
We can hear you.
Okay. Oh, thank you for having me. This is quite an honor. And as you said, I've been delving in many disciplines for decades, pretty much since the age of 5. And I've learned a work ethic over that time and in the Marine Corps. But since the 1990s, when I got into photography, my photographic work has taken me across the American West and beyond, studying landscapes, wildlife, and archaeology, and the traces of time left on both body and land. Orfeo and Canthanka fighting, those are their names, that was shot in the high desert of western Colorado in a place called the Sandwash Basin. It is a vast landscape spanning 158,000 acres, or roughly 250 square miles. The terrain is as demanding as it is beautiful. The roads are often impassable, particularly during and after sudden storms, where brief downpours turn clay roadbeds into thick sludge. At times, the only option is to wait in your car or truck for the hot sun as it slowly transforms the gray clay back into a drivable surface. And I highly recommend a high clearance 4x4. This area is near Dinosaur, Colorado, and the fossils lie along the road. You can pick them up. One can spend all day driving in the roads in the basin. My friend Cindy was with me this day, another navigator for me, and had us drive to the Ruby Pool, which is a secluded watering hole off Highway 75. We hoped it had horses and water, and it did. This image records a fleeting moment of a raw encounter between two wild stallions where dust and motion collide. Beauty and power, violence exist side by side. Even knowing what was happening, I was still just a witness. I'm very conscious of where I place myself physically, not close to the bands of horses, but typically more than 25 yards away, and within sprinting distance to my truck, which is usually on the road. These two wild horses were relatively far away, over 100 yards, so relatively safe distance. I had a new 100 to 500 millimeter lens with a 1:4 extender attached to my Canon on a tripod, situated right next to the 4x4 Titan with the door open for a quick entry. And yeah, I jumped into the back seat that day. They weren't performing for my camera. They were just going about their lives, fighting for a girl named Sable. Right after the shutter caught that moment, they quickly came my way with all the dust, spit, and action. As usual, they noticed me at the last second and slid like Pete Rose, pivoting into home base, all in one move. From butterflies to cheetahs and horses, I am drawn to subjects that exist fully within nature. The wild horses I love to watch live at the intersection of romantic myth and reality. These symbols of freedom are simultaneously overmanaged, contested, and misunderstood. Their scarred bodies mirror the land itself, resilient, enduring, and shaped by time. For me, photography is about patience and trust, allowing moments to unfold before me, knowing that something meaningful is just around a bend in the trail. This photograph grew out of a devotion to returning, paying attention, and honoring the West that continues to shape me. Being part of Proud to Be 14 reminds me that these stories live in our landscapes, and that taking the time to truly read and understand them is an act of pride. Thank you.
Hello, friends of Missouri Humanities. Whether you're a first-time listener or you've been with us before, thank you for tuning in. We love being able to share these stories with you. Missouri Humanities relies on the feedback and support of program attendees, film viewers, and podcast listeners like you to keep these initiatives alive into the future. If you find yourself enjoying this podcast and other Missouri Humanities offerings, we hope you'll consider a donation in any amount. All donations benefit humanities programs and grant funding for Missourians and Missouri organizations, which would be impossible without people like you. To donate today, visit mohumanities.org. And now, on to the podcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, here's Mark.
Thanks, Luke. Good to be with you all. A little intimidated, I must say. We have all extremely talented people here, as you just heard. And we have Sarah, Travis, James, and Donna who are going to partake in the Q&A here. Definitely want to keep this conversational. Not if you want to jump in at any moment, please do so. But I thought one way to start was, I know little about each of you, but I have read anyway that both Sarah mentors military and veteran writing groups, and that Travis is a member of the Military Writers Society of America. So I just wanted to ask you two and any others, what do those groups mean to you, and how has that furthered your own work, but also what you've seen in others, how they've been able to share their own stories, get their own emotions out on paper or how be it. Just curious about these groups and how they've helped you. Sarah or Travis, either or both.
I'll go ahead and start off the answer to that. So as a military spouse, I was busy. I was a mom. I had kids, so I kind of came to writing a little bit later. And when I did, it changed how I viewed what my family was doing. My husband and his role, me and my role, and our children. It brought clarity and let me explore in some different ways the things that impacted our lives. And I joined at one point a veterans writing group, and I really liked it. But then we got transferred, and we got actually here to San Antonio, and there, surprisingly to me, in Military City, USA, was not an established veterans writing group. So I paired with a nonprofit who sponsored the the project with space and lights and a copy machine, um, and we kind of got it going. This is its 10th year now, and over that time, I've seen members write for many reasons, but often getting the same clarity or the same opportunity to explore things that they hadn't previously given themselves permission to look at. And that is really gratifying. And there's lots of really interesting stories that come out of that, which we don't have time for because they're really amazing. But I believe it makes a difference.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Donna. It's amazing. And I'm sure that the people that have been a part of that are grateful for your efforts in starting that up. Quite remarkable. And I'm sure it's been very helpful for a lot of folks. So, yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, I'd like to echo some of what Sarah said about the idea of a group and a space. And so much of stuff exists as we're here, virtually or online. And so I think groups like that, like MWSA, and there's several others, Veterans Writing Project, Proud to Be is kind of a tent pole in the veteran writing community. There are these spaces that allow people to connect with other writers. And I started writing pretty soon after I got out of the Navy. And it's writing, it's no surprise. The writing is a very solitary effort, but it's also a communal sort of effort to be in a body of write or a community or group of other writers. Not just for accountability, but also just knowing that you're not the only one with some of these thoughts, bounce around in your head, or the desire to get them out and desire to be heard and be taken seriously. And so I think that last piece is the other thing I'll mention, is that there are these spaces that make you feel like, okay, I'm part of a society. I'm part of I'm in an anthology. I've got my work not just in front of my friends, but in front of other folks, which is why it's always encouraging to see so many people taking time on a Wednesday night to participate as an audience. That's another aspect of this. So I think the community aspect for me is what's really powerful for groups like that.
Yeah. And kind of speaking along those, James, I know your work in the little bit of research that I did says that you're currently seeking an agent for a memoir about your service. So I just wanted to ask about that, what that process has been for you. And I thought the people in this call, if you're looking for any type of assistance, probably maybe have been down these roads as well and might be able to share some stories about getting those memoirs published and how that goes. I don't know if you want to say anything about that or not, James, but it was one thing that came to mind. I have a lot of comments about your writing as well, but I thought we'd start with these overall questions.
Sure. And the piece that I read is a small section of the memoir itself from the time I was in Vietnam, and it's a multi-year project, and learning how to write and learning how to understand your own experience is a huge process, and has taken a lot of dedication. I'm sure it does for everyone. I think any kind of writing takes that kind of effort. And this one was probably from the first piece. This was actually the piece that I wrote here was a letter that I wrote to a friend when I was in the service. And that's where I started with this. And it probably taken 5 years to get from that to the memoir, which is really about how I became the person I was that had to deal with the conflict in my own sense of values and participating in a war that I had strong disagreement with. So it was a lot for me to work out in the process. And it's taken a long time. So yes, so trying to get it published, that's probably harder than actually writing the book in the first place. It's turning out, and is a totally different kind of process from the writing, and one I appreciate a lot, but don't enjoy. I enjoy the writing, but trying to get it published is getting used to rejection. And I know anyone who has tried to publish knows that, you know, the ratio of rejections to acceptance is like 100 to 1 or something, typically. And I think the same thing goes for memoir, book of any kind. And I think you just have to have high level of perseverance and keep sending out to people, keep connecting to people until you find someone who knows what you're trying to do and appreciates it and wants to help you publish it. And I'm early on in that process. I've only tried 10 places so far, and I've heard people join 40, 50 before they get a memoir accepted. So it's a long process, but perseverance is what really counts.
Well, thank you, James. Well, from what I read, I'd publish it, but I'm sure my vote doesn't count for much. But it was great. I think the what I liked most about your writing, James. Well, one thing that I liked a lot, maybe not most, but is just the reminder of how different service experiences are. You know, we at Soldiers Memorial, we of course do exhibits. We did an exhibit on the Vietnam War about 3 or 4 years ago. And certainly during that process, we had the conversation of how difficult, if not impossible, it is to capture the number of unique perspectives and stories of service that there are. Even, you know, you say somebody served in Vietnam or was in Vietnam during the war, that could be countless different service experiences. And I think your experience was one that was new to me. Never had really thought a whole lot about the PsyOps operations going on, and what that meant for you from that perspective. And I think the writing as clarity that Sarah had spoken to, that what I pulled out of yours, James, was this coming to terms, what I felt like, or what I interpreted as kind of a coming to terms with your role in creating mindsets like Wainwright's, and what potentially you serve, what you know as PsyOps, convincing folks to think a certain way about the so-called enemy. Is that am I interpreting that right, James?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, yes. The job was to make the enemy think it was fruitless to continue, and to make the soldiers feel like they're about to win, so that one would quit and the other would succeed. And that was it. But of course, that required a lot of everybody who was doing that too. And it was a tough task under those circumstances.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can imagine. All while water skiing on some river in the Mekong Delta,
Yeah.
which is just so surreal.
One of the worst decisions I ever made.
Yeah. Donna, I wanted to talk a little bit about Orfeo and Kantaka. First of all, who's on top in this photo, Donna? Is that Orfeo?
Yeah, because they were fighting for Sable,
Yeah.
and she likes him best, and he won. So, and then they fight, and I've seen so many fights, and then 1 minute later, or however long, they're drinking water right next to each other, like nothing happened. But they take hunks. I mean, you can see the scars on their body. It's pretty awful at times. They can sometimes die from it.
Yeah. So, of course, preparing for this, my mind was all military and thinking about military stuff and whatnot. apocalypse, right? That's the concept of the book. And one thing that I really latched onto, I actually found on your website, and it said the voyeurs are getting an eyeful. And
They
if
are.
if folks didn't notice, because it's very easy to miss because your eye is drawn to the fight. But there's a group of it looks like 4 to 6 horses kind of off in the background that are just kind of watching. And I thought how similar that is to military service. There's such a small number of U.S. citizens to begin with who are in the service, and then a very small number of those who actually are in this combat. And the rest of us are voyeurs in one way or another. So that really I latched onto that, and I thought, well, that's fascinating to see these two, Ortheo and Kafanka, going after it, and how that maybe reflects human nature as well in some ways.
I didn't see it at first either. And then because I had another photo of them where he's getting bit. I mean, like he's taking a chunk out of his inside. But when I looked at that, I was like, wait, what are they doing? They're just kind of like, what's going on over there,
Yeah. It's pretty wild. And that's a remote place. So I looked that up on the map because I'd never heard of Sandwash Basin before. And I thought, well, I've lived in North Dakota and I've spent a lot of time on the Northern Plains, but I'd never heard of that part. But if you all look that up, that corner of Western Colorado is fairly remote. And is that where you live, Donna, or up in that area?
It's about 3.5 hours. I'm closer to Utah on I-70 in Grand Junction. So I drive there and then I spend about 8 hours driving around on bumpy 4-wheel drive roads. And sometimes you don't see a horse, but there's usually around 1,000 in there. And they cull them. And so they take them other places, but they try to keep the famous ones in there. And especially the paints. I like that they leave the paints alone because those are my favorite. Yeah.
We have a very specific question from Randy, Donna.
Okay.
ISO, f-stop, and shutter speed of your photo. I can't answer
that. My guess is because it was a bigger lens, I'm not looking at it right now. The ISO was probably 600 to 800. The shutter speed would have been faster, maybe 500 to 600. I can't go too fast because then it darkens it, and it was a cloudy day. And then what did he say? The f-stop?
F-stop
most likely around 8, f8 or f10. Yeah. It changes a lot when they move. If you're just shooting them in the sun, it's relatively easy, but trying to get a clear shot with a big lens in it, I had the 1:4 extender on there, and yeah, it just makes everything dark, so it changes it. But thanks for the question.
Yeah. All right. Sarah, I wanted to, well, maybe I'll jump to Travis, I guess. Notes on Travis. Travis, your story. Thank you for reading it. Some of it, we didn't get through all of it. Certainly the ending of the story is incredibly powerful. It's funny because I think one thing you said in your answer to the first question was this idea of belief, and that's kind of runs through your story is the veteran Julio, his struggle with feeling like people don't believe him, right, and almost kind of giving up in some sense, not wanting to engage because even fellow service members cast doubt on the stories, on the experiences and whatnot. So he tends to want to separate. Can you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, sure. And thank you for picking up on that in the story, which I hope everyone goes and reads. yeah, the idea that in the Navy we call them sea stories, you know, the idea of like, oh, there I was, and it's, you know, sort of a, you know, it can involve at times in a competition who has the most outlandish or the, you know, the tallest tail or the, you know, like, oh, I don't know, like that, you know, that was a stretch too far for that sea story. Um, but that the idea of, you know, even like you said, even within the community of veterans, you know, as you know, Luke was reading the bios, you know, we've got so many different branches represented here, and look forward to the day when some Space Force veterans start writing their stories as well. Um, but that everybody has different, just even the basic language, the basic lingo among the services are so different, and then you add the element of like, well, were you there? Were you in combat? Oh, well, I was in the for me, I deployed to a combat zone. I was never in combat, and so you get these levels of qualifiers, and it just muddies the waters so much that it's like, well, you know, we're all just trying to tell stories. We're all just trying to, especially for veterans, a lot of us are just trying to live our lives and still return to these stories or these things that happen and trying to make sense of them. You know, a lot of times through fiction. You know, the nonfiction things might be harder to believe, and so I think yeah, and it also goes back to what I think, mentioned before about credibility or legitimacy that, you know, oh, well, that, you know, that guy, you know, expanded his story too much and he's bragging too much or downplaying himself too much. And so that the idea of, um, you know, we all want to connect with each other through stories. And so it just becomes a question of, you know, are they believable? Or even if they're not believable, are you willing to suspend the disbelief long enough to like, okay, you know, thanks for sharing your story, and then offer a story in return, which I think, as you said, the ending gets a little close to that when the guys are just all kind of, you know, at the end of a long day, how a good day ends, um, you know, not even talking about stories, just, you know, being in each other's company.
And then for you, Sarah, when I pulled one thing that I interpreted from your poetry um, was this very different the way that the service member and the civilian dealing with the same substance, I guess, in this case, sand, uh, see it in two very different ways. One, a play box filled with sand, and then of course the other experiencing a warfare in the desert. Could you speak more to that and tell me if I'm way off or what?
No, you're not way off. That's part of the poem. I mean, the main part is that, you know, me turning away and not paying attention to my mother is the metaphor for kind of ignoring that
Yeah.
ridiculous question. But it also is that distance that no matter what, I will never know what it was like to be where my husband was when he was there. No matter what he tells me, no matter how many pictures I see, I still won't know it. I I won't understand it the way he does. And he, no matter how much I tell him about what it was like when he was gone, it's the same thing. There's always going to be that distance because he had an experience that was really different than mine over the same period of time and around the same event, but we experienced it in really different ways, and it affected our lives in really different ways. So you did pick up on that there's this difference of seeing.
And then I think the other thing with your poem was the title in and of itself, which is the question: did your husband kill anybody in Iraq? And that made me pause and think, oh my gosh, like what did like just a bizarre question to receive, but then also an opposite question to ask, right? To ask somebody to pose that to a spouse. And I couldn't really get my head around what my own reaction to that would be, or how I would deal with that. But it's probably not an uncommon thing. Although I wish
I
it was.
was, yeah, I was really surprised that, I mean, if my mother had asked that question, that would be one thing. She's got a vested interest in him as a person and his experiences. But people that didn't know me very well, it was basically just morbid curiosity. They just wanted something like they just wanted to know, what happened, and you can kind of sense that. And the first couple of times I was totally baffled, but after that, my response was, well, why do you want to know? that well, I'm just concerned about you. It's like, yeah. And it wasn't other military spouses that asked me that question. So we know better.
Let me see. I had a very kind of a direct question for you, James. In the start of your writing, says you don't need a bullshit war story, but you did feel like you needed a bullshit war story, and I'm kind of interested in how you look back on that now. So many years later, if you would do the same thing again, or kind of how you view that now. Was that the story you needed to help you be brave in a war that you didn't really believe's not the right word, but didn't support?
Yeah, at the time it seemed really important. In retrospect, it's laughable. The broader experience is much more important than the individual, and everyone that was there had somewhat similar experience, but there's always a huge distinction that I see between people who actually participated in combat and those that did not. And the most interesting war stories seem to be about the people in combat, because they want answers to that same question. It's like, not did you kill anybody, but what was it like? What was that sort of thing? And so there's lots of those stories around. But a small proportion of people who served actually were in combat. But there are a huge number of people who served in lots of different ways that still had their lives changed by that experience in really dramatic ways, just from being a part of that larger thing. So it was important to me at the time, but in retrospect, it's amusing.
I think your story spoke very well to the tragedy of that war, and the inability to other cultures to see each other for who they are, and the whole idea of you have a line in there talking about if somebody came into my neighborhood and destroyed it to make it look like their neighborhood, you'd be pissed, I think is what you said in the book. Yeah. I thought that was it's an excellent story for trying to get our heads around what it means when two kind of cultures collide in that sense. So thank you for that. Yeah.
Could I, the comment before about the various people, various experiences, when I read the anthology, that's what came through to me very strongly, is how diverse the experiences are of people who are veterans. It's just a huge and diverse thing, and for people to understand the diversity of that, I think is really important, and I think the anthology makes a great contribution to that. I was fascinated by reading all the pieces and seeing the photography and the poetry, and it made a huge impression on me just to see what that diversity was. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right, we do have some questions in the chat, in the question box that I'm going to ask. Did any authors use AI to assist in your writing?
No.
I don't know, for research or for anything, I guess. Not yet.
No.
Nope. Pretty solid no. All right. between the authors here, did you get published by a publishing company, or have you self-published? Well, you've been published and proud to be. I can tell you that.
I have several. I have a bunch of essays published about rural life, not about this, but of course, they also contain my experience from being a veteran too. So I have a few publications in addition to this one, essays, mostly in literary journals.
And Travis, I know you have a book, Have Snakes, Need Birds.
Yeah, I have the two. One's not a sequel, but a follow-on. The first was a hybrid publishing, which is basically self-publishing with assistance and things like layout and cover design, which I thought the cover turned out well. And the second one was with Millspeak Books, which is again a military and veteran, mostly military and veteran focused. They do a broad range of things. They have some really exciting memoirs coming out. So James, maybe check them out as well. And so yeah, it's I think self-publishing is rapidly growing to become a much more a mainstay of getting those stories out there.
Very good. Anybody else want to chip in on that one? All right. All right. Oh, go ahead, Sarah.
I was gonna say, I don't have a book out yet. I've had a lot of the poems that are in the manuscript that I have that have been published, but I haven't gotten a book yet, and it's out there and people are looking at it, and I've gotten favorable response. So I'm just kind of waiting to see what's going to happen next.
Very good.
I can chime in. I have a few books of poetry, and just to add on to what James's frustration was with publishing, it just takes so long and you have to be so persistent. So I've had a manuscript that I've been sending out for years, and it's just kind of rearranging it, looking at it, editing it and resending it. And it's not my favorite part of the writing process by any means.
I'm in the middle of working on a book of poetry with and stories with my photography, but I'm seeing that it's either going to cost me a lot of money to do it, or I don't know if it'll work. But that, and I'm making coloring books, so that's kind of what I'm doing. But I don't know if the book's going to go anywhere. Let's see. We'll see.
All right, Donna, this one's for you. How many times have you had to capital RUN, all caps, to get out of harm's way when taking photographs?
Well, I learned that distance thing for a reason. One time, my friend and we weren't in the Sandwash Basin. There's another horse area closer to home, and the horse was like a half a mile away. And there was one juniper tree, big juniper tree, thankfully. And we started walking toward it, and this horse is coming at us. I was like, what's that going to do? We played Ring Around the Rosies under that tree with that horse chasing us. And we were not close to it. And I was like, oh my gosh. So I have to have something close. And then another time a horse came over a hill. He was down in the wash, and we were way far away. And they run fast, I will say that. And there's all kinds of holes and snake holes and everything that you're going to trip and fall as you're trying to run back to your truck. So yeah, good time. Twice well chased twice.
The Marine Corps training paid off.
It did, yes. The Marine Corps bands, yes.
Very good. One more, James. I'm interested in knowing how you chose your stories and what made these stick out more than others that you maybe didn't choose.
I'm not quite sure.
Okay.
I'm not quite sure what you're asking.
Yeah, that's what it says. It says, I'm interested in knowing how you chose your stories and what made these stick out more than others.
Well, it started out with what I could remember. And it's a long time ago. And so, but I found out that the things I could remember were for a reason. And sometimes I didn't even know the reason until I began to investigate them. So like this story I wrote as a letter, but it took me a long time to really figure out what this story was about. And when I did that, then other pieces of my experience started to come back to me. and the ones that came back, it turns out, had something behind them if you worked at them long enough. And I had a few pieces that ended up in the book that took me 4 or 5 years to figure out why it was I remember them and what it was about them that fixed them in my memory. And that was a huge learning process. So it's like you begin to write, and then pretty soon you're in a dialogue with what you're writing, and then it begins to teach you. It's a very interesting process, and you begin to learn things that you didn't think you remembered, and that seemed gone. And so it's a very interesting process. The book is full of those kinds of experiences, but many of them weren't available to me when I started the process. It's a fascinating process.
Very good. Well, those are all the questions out of the Q&A. And I think unless somebody has more that they want to say or share, I will turn it back to Nick.
All right, thanks, Mark, and thank you to all the readers who participated in the roundtable. Also, thank you to Luke for doing the introductions this evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. You can follow us on social media at Mo Humanities, or joining our email list on our website, mohumanities.org. We sincerely hope you enjoyed this evening and that you may feel inspired to pick up your very own copy of Proud to Be. Thank you, and we hope that you all have a great evening. Goodbye.